If you've been following this case, or you're just coming across it now, stay with us and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next. These are the kinds of cases where small details can change everything, and we're here to keep you updated as new information comes in. It has now been over 2 months, and one thing still doesn't sit right. There is still no clear, confirmed explanation of how this actually began, and that is where the questions start. Because in cases like this, there is usually a moment that defines everything, a clear point where something changed, a sign that tells investigators where to begin. But here, that moment is still not clearly defined in a confirmed way. And that absence is what is now raising more attention. Because when the beginning of a case is unclear, everything that follows becomes harder to understand. Now consider one of the first details that stands out. There is no widely confirmed sign of forced entry. That alone changes how this situation is viewed. Because in many cases, forced entry provides direction. It shows that someone entered without permission. It creates a starting point. But when that is not present, the question becomes more complicated. If there was no forced entry, then how did this begin? Was she already outside? Did she leave on her own before something happened? Or did someone have access in a way that did not raise concern? These are not conclusions. They are questions that exist because of what is missing. Now move to the timeline, because time should connect everything. When was Nancy last seen? When was the last confirmed contact? What happened between that moment and when she was reported missing? That period is critical, because that is where the shift happened, from normal to unknown. And right now, that part of the timeline is still not fully clear in a confirmed way. There are gaps, moments that have not been clearly explained. And in investigations, gaps are never ignored. They are where the focus goes, because something happened during that time, something that has not yet been fully outlined. Now think about how important that is. Without a clear timeline, every other detail becomes harder to place. Every claim, every update, every possibility, all of it depends on understanding that missing window. Now consider another detail. There is no widely confirmed public account of a struggle. No clear indication of a specific scene that shows exactly where something happened. And that also raises questions, because in many cases, there are signs. Something left behind, something that shows an event took place. But here that has not been clearly outlined. Again, this does not prove anything. It simply adds to the uncertainty. Now think about communication, because communication often shows when something has changed. Did her phone stop suddenly? Did messages go unanswered? Was there a final interaction that stands out? Because when communication stops without explanation, that moment becomes important. It marks a shift, and that shift is where investigators look closely. Now bring all of this together. No confirmed forced entry, an unclear timeline, no clearly defined starting point, someone in limited confirmed detail about how the event began. These are not conclusions. These are gaps, and gaps create questions. Now this is where the conversation becomes more difficult, because when questions continue to build without clear answers, people begin to look at the situation differently, not with certainty, but with doubt. And that doubt leads to new questions being asked. Could something about the way this was first understood be incomplete? Again, not a claim, not a conclusion, but a question that comes from what is missing. Now think about how investigators approach something like this. They do not jump to one answer too quickly. They examine everything. They test each possibility. They look at what is present, and just as importantly, what is not. Because sometimes, what is missing tells the most important part of the story. Now return to the central idea. Was this really a kidnapping? That question is not being answered here. It is being examined. Because right now there is still no confirmed explanation of how this began. And until that beginning is clearly understood, everything else remains open. Now think about this from your perspective. When you look at what is known and what is missing, what stands out the most? Because in a case like this, the smallest detail can change everything, and right now that detail has not yet been found. As these questions continue to build, the focus naturally shifts to what investigators would look at next. Not just the missing details, but how those details connect. Because in a case like this, it is not one single gap that matters. It is how multiple gaps begin to form a pattern. Start again with the timeline. The last confirmed moment Nancy was seen or heard from is one of the most important points in the entire case, because everything after that becomes uncertain, and everything before that becomes context. So investigators would examine that moment closely. Who saw her? What time was it? What she was doing? Whether anything about that moment felt unusual? Because even a small change can point to something larger. Now consider what follows that moment. A period where there is no confirmed activity, no verified sightings, no clear movement that has been publicly outlined. That period is not empty. Something happened there. But right now, that sequence is not fully explained in a confirmed way. And that is where the uncertainty grows. Now think about how investigators approach a gap like this. They begin by collecting everything around it: phone records, messages, any form of communication. Because even if there is no direct evidence of what happened, there may be signs of when something changed. Did her phone suddenly stop responding? Did messages go unanswered? Did activity drop off in a way that does not match normal behavior? Because a sudden stop is often more important than a gradual change. Now return to movement. If Nancy moved from one location to another, there should be some indication: a camera, a witness, a record. But when that movement is not clearly confirmed, it creates a break in the timeline, and that break becomes the focus. Now consider another possibility. The key moment did not involve movement across multiple places. Why? Whatever happened occurred within a space that has not been fully defined publicly. If that is the case, then the absence of movement becomes important, because it suggests the event may have happened closer to the last known point than expected. But again, this is not a conclusion. It is a possibility created by what is not confirmed. Now return to the detail that continues to stand out. No widely confirmed sign of forced entry. This detail continues to shape how investigators would look at the situation. Because if there are no signs of forced entry, then access becomes a key question. How did someone get close without raising an alarm? Was there familiarity? Was there a reason for trust? Or did something happen outside before any sign could be left behind? Each of these directions requires a different kind of evidence. And until that evidence is confirmed, they remain possibilities. Now think about how small details can become important at this stage. A door that was left unlocked, a routine that changed slightly, a moment that seemed normal at the time. Because investigators are not just looking for obvious signs. They are looking for anything that does not match what is expected. Now consider the role of time again, because time connects everything. If the gap between the last confirmed moment and when she was reported missing is large, then there is more space for something to happen unnoticed. If that gap is small, then the number of possibilities becomes more limited. But without a fully confirmed timeline, that window remains unclear. And that uncertainty keeps the case open in interpretation. Now think about communication again, because communication leaves traces: calls, messages, even missed interactions. All of these can indicate when something changed. If communication stops suddenly, that moment becomes important. If there was an unusual message, that becomes important. And if there was no activity at all, that absence becomes its own detail. Now step back and look at everything again. A last known moment, a gap that is not fully explained, no confirmed forced entry, unclear movement, and limited confirmed detail about what happened in between. All of these create a situation where the beginning of the case is still not fully understood. And when the beginning is unclear, everything that follows becomes harder to interpret. Now consider how investigators handle this. They do not guess. They reconstruct. They take each piece of information and place it in order. They test each possibility against what can be confirmed. And slowly they begin to close the gaps. But until those gaps are closed, the case remains in a position where questions are still stronger than answers. Now think about how this affects the public. People see updates, they hear new claims, but without a clear understanding of what happened at the start, those updates can feel disconnected because they do not have a foundation. And that foundation is what is still being built. Now return to the central question. Was this really a kidnapping? That question is still not being answered. It is still being examined because the details that would confirm it are not fully clear. And until they are, everything remains open. And at this point, everything comes back to one place: the beginning. Because no matter how many updates come in, no matter how many new claims are discussed, the entire case still depends on one thing: understanding how it actually started. And right now, that part is still not fully clear in a confirmed way, because nothing is being done, but because the details that matter most are still being carefully examined. Now look at everything together. No widely confirmed sign of forced entry. No fully clear, publicly confirmed timeline that connects each moment. No single, confirmed explanation of how the situation began. That combination is what continues to raise questions, not answers. Questions. Because when the starting point of a case is unclear, everything that follows becomes harder to connect. Now think about what that means. If there had been no forced entry, then the situation may not have begun in the way people usually expect. If the timeline is not fully clear, then the exact moment everything changed is still uncertain. And if that moment is uncertain, then every possibility remains open. That is why investigators return to the beginning again and again, because nothing else matters, but because everything else depends on it. Now consider how they move forward from here. They do not look for one big answer. They look for small confirmations, one detail at a time. They build the timeline slowly. They confirm each moment. They test each possibility. And over time, those small pieces begin to form a clearer picture. But until that picture is complete, the case remains in a position where questions are still stronger than answers. Now think about the gaps again, because those gaps are not empty. They are spaces where something happened that has not yet been fully explained. And investigators know that. That is why those gaps receive the most attention. Because once a gap is filled with confirmed information, the direction of the case can change. Now return to the detail that continues to stand out. No confirmed forced entry. Because if there are no signs that someone forced their way in, then access becomes a central question. How did someone get close? How did the situation begin without an immediate alarm? Or did it begin somewhere else entirely? These are not conclusions. They are the natural questions that come from what is not confirmed. Now think about how this affects everything else: every new claim, every new message, every new theory. All of it must fit into the timeline. And if the timeline is not fully clear, then those claims remain uncertain because they do not yet have a confirmed place to connect. Now consider the importance of confirmation. In a case like this, nothing becomes real until it can be proven. Not suggested, not assumed, proven. That is the standard investigators work with. And that is why progress can sometimes appear slow, because accuracy matters more than speed. Now think about the difference between what is known and what is believed. People may form opinions. They may look at the gaps and try to fill them. But investigators cannot do that. They must rely on what can be confirmed. And until those confirmations are in place, the case remains where it is: careful, measured, focused. Now return to the central question. Was this really a kidnapping? That question is still not being answered. It is still being examined, because the details that would confirm it are not fully clear. And until they are, everything remains open. Now think about this from your perspective. When you look at what is known and what is missing, what stands out the most? What feels incomplete? Because in a case like this, the smallest detail can change everything. And if you want to keep following how this unfolds and what new details may come out, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next update.